I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 128. Today in the show, we're bringing together 4 hunters who successfully killed a buck this year during the rut, and we're examining exactly how those hunts went down, what made them successful, and what we can learn from them. Alright, well, before we get into the meat of this episode, we need to pause briefly to thank our partners at Sitka Gear who make this podcast possible. And today, we've got a Sitka story that speaks to some of the deepest moral and ethical questions that we might face as hunters. Now, Aaron Hitchens has worked on many of Sitka Gear's films as a member of the team at Rock House Motion. And this past week, he joined his buddies down in Kansas for a much-anticipated whitetail hunt. Given that he's usually filming, he hasn't gotten a whole lot of time down there to just hunt, but this year was going to be different. He was going to have the full week to chase a Kansas giant. But that all changed as darkness faded on the very first morning, and he spotted an old rundown buck lying on the ground, obviously about to die, just 30 yards from his stand.
I didn't want to shoot something that had a chance of surviving that I didn't have a really sporting opportunity with. Like I didn't want to walk up to a deer that was having a bad day and kill it because it was too tired to run away, So as it stood up, I could tell it was obviously super exhausted, but I was doing whatever I could to assess its condition, and it had cuts in its face, and basically it just looked like it had run itself ragged in the rut. It was clearly an extremely old deer, 8 to 10 kind of range, like very, very, very old, smaller in size, and in body size, and kind of started to regress in body size. And it kind of became clear that this thing was, I don't know if it's dying of old age or dying of exhaustion, but eventually it became clear that it was dying and that it was in quite a bit of discomfort. And so I decided to burn my tag and kill the deer. And it was tough, man. It was just tough on every level. Like it was tough primarily just sort of seeing death in its natural form and realizing just how miserable this would be for the deer. Because you always think about hunting as, it's like, oh, if you don't kill stuff, it lives. But it doesn't. It lives for a while and then it dies. And when it dies, based on what I saw the other day, and I think what people would consider a relatively peaceful death for an animal, it is not this sort of natural, peaceful thing that people imagine. I mean, it was very, very uncomfortable for the animal. It was very uncomfortable for me to watch. I basically realized that this thing was just going to continue to be exhausted until, my expectation was, based on the amount of predator traffic in the area, that it would probably just end up getting eaten alive. And it really positioned what we do as hunters differently in my mind throughout the sort of the journey, as not necessarily bringing death to something that would otherwise be life, but bringing, even in the case of a non-ideal shot, bringing a more certainly a swifter death to something that, you know, was awaiting something much more catastrophic, as would happen naturally. So I felt a lot of things. None of them were positive, but at the end of the day, I figured that it was clearly an old deer. It was clearly a warrior. You know, when I walked up to that deer and grunted, it stood up basically to fight its last fight. And there's almost just a sense of honor around the animal. And I figured that the most dignity I could offer was a clean, swift kill. And that's what I did.
A tough situation, and one that I'm sure will stick with Aaron for a very long time. But in the end, sometimes our responsibility as hunters goes above and beyond our own personal goals. That said, this was a Sitka story. And if you'd like to learn more about Sitka gear, which Aaron was wearing during this experience, you can visit sitkagear.com. And now, on to the show. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Sitka Gear. And today in the show, we are bringing together 4 very serious deer hunters, all with one thing in common. We have all killed. How are you laughing already, Dan?
Well, you're building. I'm sorry for interrupting already, but you've built this up like we're some panel of the greatest minds ever. And I'm not here to speak for the other guys on the panel, but I'm like way below how you just introduced me.
Well, no, I was gonna say what I meant to say is we have 3 very serious deer hunters and 1 schmuck. But you busted into my monologue.
I'm sorry. I'll be quiet.
Yeah, please mind your place, Dan.
Co-host.
So what I'm trying to say is our plan today is to dive into each of the successful hunts that these 4 people had, trying to understand exactly why we were successful, what we did right, and what we've learned from these hunts. So, as we've alluded, one of these hunters is my co-host and schmuck, Dan. One of these hunters is myself. I somehow was able to have a successful hunt during the rut. And also joining us are my 2 very good buddies and serious big buck killers in their own right, Corey Fall and Ross Hausman. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. How's it going, Mark?
Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
Dan?
We're good. This is going to be fun. It's going to be a little messy, you know, since there's 4 of us all on here. And I wish we were actually in person, sitting around, like drinking a beer, talking right now. But we're not. We're all sitting in our own separate houses, maybe drinking beer by ourselves. But we're gonna have a good time talking because, well, you guys, the 3 of you guys, are 3 of my very best deer hunting buddies that I enjoy talking deer with. So this is gonna be a good time. And Dan, I got to ask you to kick things off here before we get into anything too serious.
Yeah.
How does it feel being on the sidelines during the rut?
You know, it feels good because I don't have to wake up early, take like 4 showers a day, none of that stuff.
Right.
But it sucks because every once in a while I'll talk to a buddy. He's like, man, I saw some tons of chasing this morning. I saw, this buck fight. I saw bucks raking the trees. I heard a buck snort wheeze. So all those things that get us excited, I'm not in the stand doing anymore. So
for like the first time in years.
Right. Like I was telling a buddy the other day, in the past 10 hunting seasons, this is only the 4th buck that I've ever shot, and probably the earliest buck I've ever shot. So I'm used to grinding it out. Like I told you on the last podcast, I was prepared for a long rut that was going to end actually, which would have been the 16th. We're recording this on the 16th. That was the last day of my scheduled hunts, but I tagged out, 14 days ago. And now I'm just, living vicariously through Instagram.
Yeah. So what have you been doing for these past 14 days? Changing diapers, washing dishes,
that
kind of stuff?
Yep. Actually, a lot of that, making the wife happy that I'm back, planning to take some time off late season now. Basically, you called me out, and I feel like shotgun season in Iowa gets over on December 18th, so I can start hunting again with a muzzleloader tag, which is a primitive weapons tag, so I can use my bow, so I can get out there and maybe try to make something happen late season.
Nice. Well, I'm glad that me calling you out had an impact. I knew if I appealed to your pride, it would get you out hunting.
Yep. I can't have Mark Kenyon oust me.
No, that's embarrassing for all parties.
Right.
So okay, so let's speaking of Iowa, Ross, you're an Iowa guy. We talked to you last year about shed hunting, but we've not talked to you about deer hunting. Can you give us just a super short cliff notes on your history as a deer hunter? Is this something you've been doing your whole life, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I think I probably started when I was, 13 with my dad. We went I'm from Wisconsin originally, and so everybody used to go up to northern Wisconsin or to the Northwoods, right, for gun season. So when I was 13, that's kind of when I started, and I shot my first buck, a little forky, that first year, and I was just hooked. And I remember when I was a little kid, I always wanted to go hunting. I always had a drive for it, and ever since shooting that first buck, I was just totally hooked on deer hunting. So then it just kind of snowballed. Got a bow, started bow hunting, went a lot of seasons without shooting anything, but just started learning a lot. As a kid, hunting public land, going after school every day, all that kind of stuff. As I got older then, I started hunting more seriously for bigger bucks, obviously. And then the reason I ended up moving to Iowa is obviously because I really loved deer hunting, and I knew my opportunities would be a lot better. So long story short, I ended up in Iowa quite a few years ago now, and haven't looked back since. So it was a great decision. I'm so glad that I'm down here because I get to live my passion where there are some giant whitetails and a lot of them. So.
Mm-hmm. And then what you do is you make me and Corey feel miserable because you text us pictures of all the big deer you shoot or see.
Yeah. No doubt. I do. It's not. I don't do that to be like, hey, look at what I can. I do that to actually make you guys upset. I really do. I might be bad, but I'm I can't wait to send this to these guys. They're gonna be so mad in Michigan.
Corey and I we know you're that big of a jerk. And isn't that true, Corey?
I know. But
Yeah, he does. He just rubs it in. He just loves to send those pictures just to get us all drooling over here when we can't be in Iowa.
Oh my gosh! Well, last night me and Corey were at a buck pull here in Michigan, and there was a serious big buck. I mean, it was a buck that even you guys in Iowa would be impressed with. You should be impressed with. What would we get, Andy or Corey? What was the raculation you pulled on him?
I think we came up with 192. That was we might have been giving him a half inch here or there. We even going super conservative. I think he was high 180s gross. He was an absolute stud. Yeah. Big deer.
So we text this to all my hunting buddies here. We're on this little group text message, and Ross just responds, "Boring," and we just cursed you out.
I just dropped my deer off at the locker, and there was a 190 something in there. So it's kind of and Peter and I always joke about that. My buddy Peter, we always do that all the time. So that's funny. I was just joking, though, guys. That was a nice buck. You know that.
So
I never see deer that big either. So.
Yeah, true story. So Corey, what about you? Give us your little background real quick here.
Well, born and raised in Michigan, and I actually fortunate enough to live about 15 miles from the legend Mark Kenyon himself. So I
you have that on your resume?
What's that?
You have that on your resume?
No, it's not on my resume. It's not on my resume.
About putting it on there.
But yeah, born and raised southern part of the state here. I've been hunting since I was 12 years old. So now I'm on my about 20th year, I guess it is. And been fortunate enough to take several nice deer here at home. And I also lived in Iowa when I was going to school. That's where I met Ross. Lived out there for about 4 years, and I took a few nice deer out there with my bow too. So
now I'm back home, and I guess dreaming that I was still in Iowa.
Mm-hmm. Me and Corey get coffee. Not every Thursday, but as many Thursdays as we can pull off, we get coffee and breakfast. And usually every one of those conversations while we're eating breakfast is about how Corey wishes he was in Iowa. So
yeah, that's exactly right.
You and me both, though.
Someday, Corey. Oh, yeah, someday.
Yeah. So last week on the podcast, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, I can't remember, but I asked Dan for one word to describe how he feels about the rut. So I got to thinking, I'm curious to hear what you guys think. So real quick off the top of your head, Ross, one word to describe how you feel about the rut, or what describes the rut.
So if I think about the rut, what do I think, or what do I feel?
One word to describe it.
I hate to say it because I'd say stressful, just because that's my personality. I hate to say it, but I get so stressed out. But that's what comes to mind. I get stressed out when the rut comes, but it's exciting. It's like a exciting, stressful kind of thing, because you're always thinking about where you should sit, what the wind's going to be, what the weather's like, and there's just so much info that gets processed that just kind of stresses me out. So, and you guys know that. So I don't know. That's what I come up with.
Yeah, that sounds very accurate. That's about what I would have guessed for you, Ross. What about you,
Yeah,
Doc?
I know. I'm working on it.
That's good. Corey?
I was just gonna say tough. I mean, as you guys all know, it's a grind, and I think a lot of guys, even though the rut is only typically a solid week to 10 days, that's a lot of time. And if you're as diligent as Mark Kenyon and you sit in the stand for 14 hours a day, that's a lot of hours. That's a lot of hours in the stand, so it can be tough. And I guess though maybe one word is I don't know if it's really one word, but it can change in a second. So unpredictable is probably the word I would use, because you can be sitting there 1 minute and you've been, seeing 0 deer all day, and the next second there's 2 huge bucks fighting in front of you and deer running everywhere. So it can change in a second. So
yeah,
unpredictable.
Yeah, that's so true. That's I would take what you say, Ross, the way I look at the rut, or the way I feel about the rut usually is, part one is what Ross said. It is the ultimate stressor for me. I'm just, I'm thinking about all the things I need to be doing, and it's physically grueling and it's mentally difficult at times and all that kind of stuff. But the only thing that keeps me going is I keep reminding myself of what you just said, Corey. It's it can just change in a second. And this past week when I was in Ohio, and really before that in Michigan, things weren't going quite the way I wanted them to. And then in Ohio, they really weren't going the way I wanted them to. And I just had to, literally, I would say it. I was just sitting there in the tree stand just saying, it can change any second. Just keep it together. Any second it could change. Even though I'd see a forky all day, and then I'd see a doe the whole next day, I just kept saying, it can change. And sometimes it does. So I guess, Dan, can I throw it to you? Can you be the lead host for a second here? Because I think maybe we should talk a little bit about the first successful rut hunt. If you don't, maybe I'm stealing the show here. Can I tell my story, Dan? I guess.
Guys, what do you think? Should we let Mark tell a story, or should we just ignore him and have our own conversation? No, Mark. Why don't you tell us what happened in Ohio?
Okay. So I'll tell you guys what happened in Ohio, and then you guys feel free to grill me on the specifics and anything like that, because hopefully there's something we can learn from each one of our stories. So I kind of alluded a little bit to what happened, but since we last talked, Dan, on the last podcast, I think we were talking about me throwing a Hail Mary in Michigan and doing the 4-hour rattling, hunt on the edge of Holyfield's bedding area.
Tell me how you were successful.
Yeah, so that didn't quite work out. But I did hunt that stand, when I knew the wind wasn't right. But I hunted there anyways, with the thought process being either I get lucky and I get a shot at him, because this is my best, closest stand I can be to where he's at, or I blow out a bunch of deer, but maybe I get this deer to be a little bit smarter so he doesn't get killed in the next 2 weeks when all these guys are out here with their guns. So I did that, and I am excited to tell you that it apparently worked to some degree, because opening day of gun season was yesterday in Michigan, and Holyfield did not get killed He has not been killed since I left. I saw him today at noon. He is alive.
Wow.
Yes.
Were you
That's
sitting all
awesome.
day today?
No, I actually didn't hunt today. I just happened to be in the area, and there he was out in the middle of a tall, kind of CRP-ish field, all by himself, just staring around, looking all around him on my property. And there he was. So I happened to have my camera, and so I just filmed him for a little bit, and then he walked off into this bedding area right in the edge of my food plot system that I've been wanting to kill him. I thought that'd be the spot I could do it, and now he's finally in there. So that
Are
was
you going
exciting.
tomorrow morning?
No.
Do you want to kill him?
I do. We've talked about my gun season sanctuary idea.
Yeah.
You know? So I don't push in there right now because I just don't want to blow them out to the either side of me where there's like just so many hunters. And interesting side note that you don't know this, Dan, but Corey knows, and Ross I think knows. But the night before opening day of gun season, I happened to be in the area and I saw flashlights back on this hunting property I have. And so I was freaking out, and I went and got my four-wheeler, drove out there, ended up confronting these people that were walking on my neighbors and on this property I can hunt. And I'm like, what are you guys doing back here? Long story short, this guy had shot that buck Frazier that I had passed a few different times.
Oh boy.
And he was out tracking. So, in a perfect world, they would have.
Did they get him? I mean, did they find the buck?
They did not find the buck, which is a bummer. I think they videoed it, and it looks like it was a shoulder blade shot, I think. So hopefully he survives. But that was kind of a bummer because, they shot a buck that I was hoping would get to be a year older, which nothing wrong with that. The guy, I mean, awesome for that guy. Nothing wrong with shooting a deer that makes you happy. But also, we ended up where they were tracking that deer was in Holyfield's like core area. So I was like, well, he'll definitely know there's hunters around now. So that said, now Holyfield was right in the smack dab middle of my stuff today. So I'm hoping he'll stick around there. And the thing is, I don't even have a gun I can take out right now. Even if I want to go, I did think about it. I was like, shoot, could I go back and like get my stuff and sneak out here? But I don't even have a gun I can use down here. Because my muzzle loader is all messed up, and I haven't bought a new one yet, and I can't use a rifle down here. So I could like grab my bow and try to do a spot and stalk on him, but that doesn't seem too terribly high odds. So, but I digress. I'm not talking about Holyfield anymore. I'm supposed to be talking about Ohio. So I left after trying to kill Holyfield, couldn't get it done. Went to Ohio with high hopes. Lots of nice bucks down there, of course. And I hunted for 4 days with pretty much nothing exciting going on. I mean, like Corey said, I was hunting the entire day, from dawn till dusk, and it was just dead. And you've heard me talk about this property in the past. Like, it's traditionally kind of dead a lot of the time. So, like, I knew that going into it. I knew there's going to be a lot of slow days, but it just seemed like worse than even I expected. I did see what was probably a 3-year-old on the first day, off in the distance, really briefly, and that was cool to see that. But then after that, it was like nothing, and I was in the very best stand probably on that property. And then the next day was another great stand and didn't hardly see anything, and it just kind of kept racking up. Day 2, 3, 4, and what, Corey, you got down there the day after I did, and then, right? How long did you stay? 2 days, 3 days?
Yeah, I was there Thursday, and I left Saturday kind of midday.
Yeah, so you left, and then Josh was there. My buddy Josh was with me, and then he had to leave Sunday, and so Corey was gone, and Josh was gone, and I'm sitting there, and now I'm all by myself down there, and I haven't seen anything worth, nothing bigger than the Forky since the first day or second day, I think. And so finally, after hunting all my great rut stands, I was a full day in this really good bottom stand that we talked about on one of the rut podcasts, stand. Another 2 full days on this ridge that traditionally funnels deer. A third day I went and hunted this big new bedding area stand that we've never hunted before over on this opposite ridge, and just nothing. So day 5, and I was like, screw it, I'm just going to do something different. I went and moved it midday to this little corner stand we have on the very corner of the property where I can see my open field and I can see the neighbor's open field where usually there's a lot of does. And my whole thought process, well, I can see a large area, and I put a decoy out in front of me. And I thought, all right, if I can get lucky and happen to see a nice buck finally, maybe I can call to him and bring him in here. Because right now it certainly doesn't seem to be happening in the core of our property, so maybe there's something happening on the periphery. And long story short, set up that decoy just like I always have in the past, but no nice buck has ever seen. And a couple hours into it, I started seeing some does coming out, which was nice because I hadn't hardly been seeing any does at all beforehand. And then, I don't know, maybe an hour or 45 minutes before dark, I see a flash a couple hundred yards to my, I don't know, it'd be southeast. And I pull up my binos, and I just saw a wall of tines, what looked like a wall of just tall white tines. And instantly, I was like, shoot her. And I swear to God, Dan, I didn't even look at him again with my binos or even thinking about it. It was just like, big buck. And then it was just like game on. So I just remember I pulling through my pockets trying to find my grunt tube because he's following a doe about 200 yards away, heading into the neighbors, about to cross the line. So I get my grunt tube out and I let out a big rah. He keeps going. I let out a snort wheeze. He keeps going. And I just let out one just heavy, heavy roar, just as loud as I can make it. Just anything to get this deer's attention. And that stopped him in his tracks. And he turned and looked right at me. And you could see him, his ears perk up when he saw that decoy. And then it was literally like I was watching a TV show. He just turned, ears perked up, you saw him bristle, and then he just started running right at that decoy. And I was like, holy crap, this is actually happening. It was really sweet. I couldn't believe it, but I had all these things I had to do. I remember, I didn't even think about, okay, do I want to shoot him or not? Is this anything? It was just like, okay, I'm going to shoot this buck. Now I need to do step 1, which was slowly turn, grab my bow. Step 2 is slowly turn back, make sure he hasn't seen you. Step 3 was make sure your rangefinder's handy. Step 4 was make sure your camera's on, position it to try to be on the decoy. Can you get the deer in the shot right now? And then before I knew it, he was at 40 yards coming in behind this tree branch. He was at 35 yards. He was at 30 yards, but he's this whole time behind this one branch that was out in the middle of this field kind of. And I drew back just before he got past that branch, and I'd be able to shoot, and then he froze. So I was stuck at full draw, and it felt like a really long time. But now watching the video, it wasn't as long as I thought. But I felt like I was starting to shake, so maybe I just need to lift more weights or something because he finally took a step out, and as soon as he took the step out, I touched it off, and I pulled the shot a little bit to the left. But I don't know. You know how it is in that moment. I knew I had to get that shot off as soon as I could because you've probably seen video where those bucks they posture. He was doing that thing. He was all puffed up and he was kind of curved and then slowly side walking over towards the decoy. And I knew at any second he's going to charge and hit that thing. And as soon as he hit that thing, he'd realize, okay, that's not normal, and he'd run off. So I was like, I need to get this shot as soon as he steps out from behind those branches. So as soon as he did, I let her go. But wasn't a perfect shot. He bounded off 50 yards, stopped, was hunched up, and then slowly walked away. So I knew that I had gotten something into his paunch. And after looking at the footage, looked like it entered maybe around the liver, exited back towards the guts because it's very slightly quartering to me. And I let him sit overnight. And then the next morning I went out there, and I found him 100, 150 yards away. He didn't go very far. He bedded down, and that was all she wrote. So
did you hit? I know you sent me some pictures and whatnot, but do you feel that you ended up hitting maybe back lower lung, or do you think it was even further back than that? Did you hit diaphragm, liver, what?
I think it wasn't lung. That picture that I sent you when he's hunched up like that, I think it looked a lot more forward than what the shot really did. Because when you watch the video of it, you can see it enter pretty far back. It entered a good 6-7 inches farther back than probably where I wanted it. So I think clipped liver and then went out the back, towards that front part of the guts. So not my best shot ever, but it worked out okay. So that was my rut.
So after you shot this buck, I know we had exchanged some text messages and had some side conversations, but Was this buck what you thought he was after you walked up on him?
So I hate those guys who are always like, oh, ground shrinkage. I thought it was a lot bigger, or I thought it was a different deer, or whatever. So I don't want to be like that. But I was just excited, and I didn't even think about it. Like when I was in Michigan and I was seeing these deer that I was passing, like when I saw a nice buck, I was pulling out my binos and examining them and like, okay, I really want to shoot Holyfield, but is this a 4 or 5 year old buck? Really trying to look at their bodies. Obviously not. Okay, not going to shoot them. In this instance, I didn't even think about it.
Right.
So no, the first thing I thought when I saw this deer coming across that field way out there, I just saw his side, and I saw, those 2-3 tall tines, and I was like, wow, this is a shooter. It just instantly looked like a really nice big buck, and I just didn't even think about it after that. So he is younger than, what I had originally wanted to kill in Ohio. My goal was at least a 4.5-year-old. I don't think this buck wasn't 4. He was 3.5. So, yes, not exactly what I had gone into the season going for, but at the same time, he got my heart pumping. This was a really cool hunt, the first successful hunt I've ever had over a decoy, and still a really nice deer. So I'm very happy with it. I'd say the only downside is just that, in the moment, I'm like, oh, thank goodness, the hunt's done. I was able to fill my tag. I was, getting down on myself until that point. But now I was like, oh, man, it would have been nice to keep hunting down there, go back later in the year. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on all that.
Gotcha. Yeah, dude, I'm not trying to throw you under the bus, but it's just like I would have been in the same exact situation as you, but I missed. You know what I mean? Right. So it's not like there are definitely times when the energy and the blood is pumping and a little bit of that thought process goes out the window, but that's why we all do it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't regret it at all, because that was an awesome hunt, and it made me really happy, and I've got some incredible meat, and in the long run, that's the very most important thing. I've got some great meat to feed myself and my wife with, and an awesome memory. So it was cool. And it was, like I was saying at the beginning, it was just like another really great reminder for me. Like, gosh, I feel like every year during the rut, I tend to, fall into that trap of like, after 5, 6, 7 days go by or whatever, sometimes longer, and things aren't going my way. I'm like, oh, it's not going to happen this year. It's not going to happen. You start feeling down. But I just keep on trying to keep myself positive and tell myself that over and over. And I've been lucky enough these past few years that I've been rewarded for sticking it out. That's not always going to happen, but I was fortunate that it did this year.
And like Corey Fall says, it's unpredictable.
Yes.
That's right.
It's true.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That was how my hunt. Do you got anything about what I did you guys are curious about? I mean, kind of the basic gist of why I think it was successful was that, I kept, I was thinking about leaving. I was getting kind of down and out about it, but I didn't. I stuck it out. So I think that was one thing that led to success. I think number 2, I put myself in a place where I could see a large area, because I knew if I could see one, I have a chance of calling one. And then number 3, I used that decoy, which for the first time, that I've had an opportunity, it actually worked out really well. And I guess the only other thing I would point out is if you have not listened to our episode with John Dudley that was from earlier this fall, be sure to listen to that, because he walks through exactly how to set up a decoy, and I followed his instructions exactly, and it worked out perfect. I had that decoy set up so that the wind was blowing from the decoy to me, and then I angled the decoy slightly towards me, so it looked like he was kind of looking over to my left, and then I only used one antler on him, so he doesn't look like he's too dominant of a buck. And what happens is when a buck, what's supposed to happen at least, and what did happen in this case, is that when a buck sees this deer, he's going to want to come downwind of it because he wants to smell it, and then he also wants to approach that deer head on. So when it happens, it gives you a good broadside shot when he comes around that corner. So I think for me, those are the 4 things I took away from it, is like, okay, these 4 things went well, and I think these are 4 things I did that led to this success. But I don't know. anything else that I should cover on that front, Dan, or any of you guys?
No, I think you explained it pretty good. I think that all three of us can agree that you need to go kill Holyfield now.
Yeah, I do. He's haunting me. Now I just need to figure out. Okay, here's a question. This is what I'm torn between right now, and I want to get to you guys' other stories. But so yes, I usually do leave this property alone during gun season as a sanctuary to try help. Hopefully some of these bucks can make it to another year. And if there's a specific buck I'm after, I think I've got a better chance of killing them in the late season rather than trying now and pushing them to get shot by a neighbor. But I am torn. Do I go out now or during the late season with my muzzleloader and have a better chance of killing them? Or do I stick to my, bow hunting quest and only use my bow? I'm kind of torn on that because on one side I want to kill him. On one side I'm like, man, killing with a bow would be like the purest way to do it. I don't know. Dan, what do you think?
Dude, I'm telling you, I don't care really how you do it, but this is a risk versus reward sport. So you saw this buck on your property today at noon. He's there. Who knows how long he's going to be there if a hot doe drags him to a neighboring property and gets shot regardless. You need to be out there hunting him. And you need to, you can't control where he's going to go. Even if there's low pressure on your property, yes, you may stick around, but at any moment a hot doe could come through and make him hop the fence and your neighbor shoots him anyway. So I say while he's there, you got to make a move on him.
Yeah, you make some fair points.
What about you guys, Corey? What do you think Mark should do?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I guess the first question you have to answer is your desire to kill the deer, strong enough that it doesn't matter which weapon you use, or do you really feel that you got to kill him with your bow? Because I agree with Dan. If you just want to take that animal, right now is the time to do it because he's there, obviously. But if you are dead set because you started hunting him with the bow, that's the way you want to do it. I like your shotgun sanctuary idea. I think you have enough cover right there in that general area, and obviously there's food there, that if you stay out of there, you've got a, probably 75% chance, pretty solid chance that he stays. But like Dan said, anytime a hot doe could come through there or something random could happen, the neighbor's dog runs through there barking or something like that happens that you don't expect, he takes off, and the neighbor guy does happen to kill him, and you see his picture on Facebook tomorrow and you're thinking, geez, I should have been out there. So yeah, that's really tough.
Ross.
Yeah. I don't know. That buck he's a wanderer too. Like he's got the personality to be a buck to kill, so I don't know. I just think he moves around a lot for being 4 years old. There's no doubt about that.
Well,
especially for how much you've seen him. So I don't know. Especially, I don't know. It's up to whether you want to shoot him with a gun or a bow. I think. If you want to shoot him with a bow, just do what you're doing. But if you want to kill him, then I don't think there's any better time than now.
I will say though,
I don't know.
He's very daylight active, right? We've by far he's the most daylight active buck I've ever seen. But all of it, at least all of it that I've observed or gotten on trail camera, it's all in like a 200-yard square area. It's in a very small area. So it's like he has this little tiny area where he's like very comfortable. But like I've never seen him or gotten daylight pictures of him anywhere outside of that. So I don't know. He's kind of figured out that there's this little sweet spot he can be that, he's not going to get killed. And I'm just keep on hoping that, if I don't screw that up, one of these times I'll be able to edge in there and get a shot. But
if you keep him in there, then you should be able to hit him.
Yeah, I don't know.
Eventually.
Yeah, I think the positive thing on that farm you hunt, is that you have a large volume of does there. So typically, I think when there's a mature buck, at least what I've seen in an area with a lot of does, there's not a ton of competition for those does. I mean, there's other bucks there, but there's plenty of does kind of to go around. So the chances of him, going too far astray from that little, 15, 20 acres on the neighbors and then on your piece, I don't think he's going to take off and go too far during shotgun with the pressure around there. So I think you do have a good chance of him making it and having a chance with your bow. But like Dan said, if you want to kill the deer, the next couple of days while he's on your place is probably the best time. So, yeah.
I know there's bucks down here and some of the places that I hunt, and they don't show up until right before or during shotgun, and they know where it's safe. And I mean, if you're seeing him with that noon today,
yeah.
I mean, he knows where all the activity's at, and he's been through the gun season in Michigan before, so I don't think he'll go anywhere. I wouldn't worry about it too much. I mean, running the cameras down here, even, it's crazy how many giant bucks show up into these like little sanctuaries, and they hang out there for that whole gun season, give it a little time, and then they're gone again. And they just, I mean, I swear they even show up like a day or two before, when guys start wandering around right before season. They just know when that's happening, and I'm sure Holyfield knows it too. So I'm sure that's why you saw him just standing up in daylight noon today.
Mm-hmm. And he was in the middle.
He just knows it's safe today.
Yeah, and he was in the middle of a CRP field, like where there's no trees or anything around for at least 100 yards on any side of him, just where, no hunter was going to be, This is an area that's...
I bet you he's with a hot doe right now in that CRP. She was bedded down.
There wasn't when I saw, but there certainly could be now, or could have been earlier.
Was it tall enough to where you could see like his feet? And if there was a doe bedded within 10 yards of him, would you have been able to see her?
No, I wouldn't have been able to see her. The only reason why I think he wasn't with a doe is because I watched him walk away and walk into timbered cover.
I gotcha.
Earlier before the season, Dan, I talked about like these two little bedding areas that I think he uses the most: bedding area, the front bedding area, and back bedding area.
Right.
Well, he was in the CRP field, which was in front of the front bedding area, so even closer to the road. And then he walked from that into that front bedding area, this little patch of brambles and little trees and junk like that. So I don't know, but we'll see. I need to go buy a muzzleloader, I guess, if I'm going to go try to do that. So enough about my story with Holyfield, because I feel like everyone has heard me talk about him so many times. All the comments I get now are just kill that deer already. So Corey, you were you killed after Dan, but before me and Ross.
Uh-huh.
So Tell me about your hunt, because 2 days beforehand, you texted me, or maybe you were telling me on the phone, and you said, all right, tomorrow morning, I'm killing this buck at 9:30 a.m. You told me that. Now, you didn't do it. You didn't pull it off at 9:30 a.m. that next day, but the following day, you did. How'd you do it?
Well, I guess there's probably factors, but I guess I'll start from the beginning. The property I'm hunting is about 70 acres of, marsh, CRP, sporadic kind of cedars, and then on the far east side there's a big oak flat that's kind of a big ridge or a big hill. The neighbors own a majority of it, and then the property that I have, rights to hunt, it only has maybe 2 acres of that big hillside. But anyways, that's kind of the general picture of what the place looks like. I did put about a half an acre food plot in this year of oats and brassicas, the Whitetail Institute mix, which has helped keep a lot of deer in there. But anyways, I got pictures of this buck about the first week of October. I think it was right around like the 4th or 5th, 6th, something like that of October. I got pictures of him at night, and I only had, a handful of pictures. I knew he was there, but I just wasn't getting anything during the day. And then I think it was like the 22nd or 3rd of October, I pulled the card, and he was there in daylight, like 2 minutes after daylight, and he was headed back into the stick stuff. And so I assumed, based on the fact that it was right at daylight, that he was probably bedded in there. And I don't know about you guys, but I kind of do follow that moon guide a little bit. And I was looking at November, 5th and 6th being, red moon days. And I just I figured that my best chance of killing him with the only daylight pictures I had of that deer were, first thing in the morning, and with those being good movement days, I figured if I could get close enough to where he was bedded, that I may have a shot at him. So I slipped in there, and it was a stand that I hung last year, and I have not sat it at all this year. This was the first sit, and I was able to kill him, like you just said. It was I think it was about 8:40 in the morning. So that was kind of what transpired.
So what specifically happened, though? You snuck into that stand in the morning, and tell us a little bit more about how that stand was positioned. Why was that stand a good spot? And then what happened with the actual encounter?
Yep. Okay. So the stand, to kind of paint the picture, like I described a minute ago, there's like a big hill that's like a kind of like an oak ridge, I guess is the best way to think of it. There's a lot of red oaks up there. There's some cedars, good bedding area. It's kind of thick on one end of it, and it drops down into this little, I don't know, it's probably a couple acre, like kind of marsh with a bunch of brush and bushes and really thick area there. Anyways, I positioned the stand on what would be kind of the northeast corner of this little swale hole right at the edge of the big hill that kind of goes up into that oak flat. Anyways, based on the pictures I got of that trail camera, I figured he was probably bedded up on that ridge somewhere. And the wind was out of the southwest, and I had this stand positioned where I could come in from the north, get in the stand, with the wind in my face. And I figured if he was either headed back across this marsh to go up the hill into the bedding, or if he was in the bedding and got up and moved at all during daylight the first couple hours, that was going to be my best chance to actually shoot the deer. And what happened was about 20 after 8 that morning, a little 6-point or a forky, I didn't get a real good look at him, came down to a scrape, freshened up a scrape, stood there for a few minutes, worked the licking branch, and then he looked back up the hill, and I could tell he was kind of getting nervous. And then all of a sudden I hear this really loud, like, snort wheeze, and like he just come charging out of there, and the little buck took off. And what I didn't know at the time is there was a doe bedded in that marsh it's a little piece of high ground off the marsh, like maybe 40 yards away. I didn't see her. And he chased off, the little buck stood there at the scrape, and then kind of started working out into the marsh, kind of headed towards me. And about that time, I still hadn't seen the doe yet. The little buck was still standing there, and this buck just kind of stood in this thick brushy stuff. So I have one of those little can calls, doe bleat. So I the doe bleat. Of course, his ears perked up, looked straight at me, and started coming my way. So I thought, this is going to be great. And about that time, I saw movement. I look, and she stands up. I don't know if she heard the doe bleat, the can call I used, or if at this time he was getting close enough to her that she just got up. So then he locked on the doe, and then of course the calling was out the window. I wasn't going to call a whole lot more to him because I figured it was over. And he stood with her, or he stayed there near her for probably a good 10 minutes. And luckily enough, she kind of started moving my way, which gave me a little bit of an opportunity for a shot, but it was like I was about 40 or 45 yards. That was a little bit out of my comfort zone. Anyways, I ended up getting him in, and he came in to about 35, and he was facing me. And I came to full draw just because I was waiting for him to turn, and she saw me draw. So I'm looking at her out of my right eye, and I'm looking at him out of my left eye. And luckily she looked back at him, so I let the bow down, and, he kind of, he was still locked on her. She was getting nervous. She didn't spook, but she started to she bounded 2 or 3 times away, and he turned to go around this bush, and he gave me like a 33-yard shot, and I slipped the arrow in there, and he only went about 100 yards. So that's basically the story in a nutshell.
Nice. All right, Dan, what are you wondering about this hunt first?
My first question, and it's because we've talked about it, I'm curious, when it comes time to draw back and, squeeze the trigger, let the arrow fly, what's running through your head? Me and Mark have both had what I would almost say some kind of a target panic episode, if that might be what you want to call it. What goes through your head at the last, moment? Do you feel like you have a moment of clarity, or is it kind of autopilot?
I would say that there's more autopilot than clarity. with me, it's kind of weird. If I get time to look at a deer, like a lot of guys say, man, I like them coming in really fast. So I just take a look, shooter, all right, and they go into autopilot and they make the shot. I'm kind of the other way around, actually, because I like to see the deer, and I know, once I know for sure, I make the decision, 100% that's an animal I want to harvest. I think I become more confident with the time, especially when I watch his demeanor. Like this deer was I could tell he was 100% focused on that doe. So I knew as long as I didn't get her completely alerted, I had time to kill the deer. That's kind of the way I looked at it with this hunt. So there was a little more confidence in that shot than in other shots that I've taken. I think, like you said, when they come charging in and you're like, oh, geez, there's a shooter, I think you just go on, a lot of guys anyways, go on autopilot. And sometimes you rush the shot or you don't make as good of a hit as you'd like. Not because you're a bad archer, just because, emotions set in and you maybe squeeze the trigger a little bit premature or something maybe,
Right.
What do you think, Corey? I listed off a couple things I thought probably led to me actually pulling off my hunt. What do you think the couple core things were for you that you did right that led to you getting that shot?
Okay. I would say probably the number one thing was I knew he was there, like I said, several weeks before. And part of the reason I didn't hunt that stand is it's the furthest stand on the property from where I park and enter the property. And this property is a little bit difficult for access because there's a lot of good bedding and thick cover between where I park to enter and where this area on the property is. And I think I could have probably went in there. Obviously, when I got those pictures, the 22nd of October, I could have been all excited and said, all right, I'm going there tomorrow morning. He's there. I'm going to try to kill him. But it was still early. I had a few more weeks before I was going to Ohio. I have some other good stands on the property. And I think leaving that stand alone and sitting it for the first sit on, like I said, that November 6th with the good moon, the right wind, number one, I had wind in my face, blowing out over this open area away from where I thought he was bedding. And, doing those things right. Had I gone in there a couple weeks earlier, he could have been there, sure. Might have worked out just fine, but he probably wouldn't have been on a hot doe, which is partly distracting him, gave me the opportunity. And I could have burned the stand down, hunted it 2 or 3 times and then never got the opportunity. So I think probably first sit, right wind, and I waited till later in the year to go to that best stand. So that would be that's what I think. So.
Okay.
Do you run a lot of trail cameras?
I have like 5 or 6, like not all on the same farm. I usually put 2 on each one of the properties I hunt. I'll put one kind of on the outside edge or where there's a, close to like maybe a food source. And then I try to put one back in the cover, and I only check that if I'm going into that stand or I'm in that area where, I'm already in there to hunt, so I don't, make an extra trip in there. I use them more just inventory. Like a lot of guys, I think, put them on certain trails and try to figure out time when they're going to and from. But I mostly use it just, is there a buck there that I want to try to hunt? Is it worth my time? That's why I use it for the most part. Yeah. Right. Yep.
Speaking of rut, I'm jumping a little bit here, and if you, Ross, or Dan have more questions about Corey's specific hunt here, well, I guess before I jump here, do either one of you guys have any other questions for Corey about this hunt?
I don't.
No, we're good.
All right.
Okay.
Corey, I want you to tell the story, because I've alluded to this in past episodes. We've talked about the infamous bump and dump tactic many times, but we've never had anyone on the show who's actually pulled it off. Until today, you, Corey Fall, have pulled off a bump and dump, and you killed a booner. Can you tell us how that all happened? Because that was during the rut too, so that's a rut tactic that you could try, hypothetically.
Yep, that was actually another November 6th morning, 3 years ago, so same morning. That hunt, I was in Iowa, and I knew there was a few big deer, of course, on the farm. Every year there's at least a couple of big deer on the farm. But what had happened is the other guy that hunts that farm had a trail camera in this general area in September, and he got 2 pictures of a profile side view of the deer I ended up killing, and I knew it was a big deer. And I want to say he moved the camera shortly thereafter, but at least I knew the deer was there. And I had been hunting another area of the farm and I was seeing some 2-year-olds, and I think I might have seen one 3-year-old, but nothing that was super exciting. Anyways, I had this one particular finger was real intriguing to me, and I'd never hunted it. And then one morning, of course, the morning of November 6th, it was pouring down rain. And I, had the option of, do I go out, and I do not have good rain gear. I'll make that statement right now. So I thought, do I go out? Yeah, right, I do. They're not good. They're not good. So do I go out and sit in the rain in the stand that I'd been hunting, or one of the 2 stands I'd been hunting, or do I sleep in and wait till the rain passes and maybe move a stand or do some scouting? So I chose the latter there. I waited. And got in there around 8:30, 9 o'clock, I think it was. And my thoughts were, it just rained. Everything was soaking wet, the best time to scout a new area. So I thought, well, I'm going to sneak in there. If there's some big rubs and scrapes or some really fresh sign, I'm going to hang and hunt. That was kind of the goal. So as I'm walking in, and it actually worked in my favor, I spooked some turkeys, and they flew over this ridge, and I was walking through a standing cornfield down one of the rows, and they happened to fly. Well, I'm watching them fly, and I happened to look, and at that time, this big buck stood up out of this kind of bedding area on this little point, and he saw the turkey spook, looked into the corn to see what had spooked him, but because there was, the corn was 6 or 7 feet high, he never really saw me, and I had the wind in my face, so that worked out nice, and he bounded out of there. So immediately I realized, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, and he was in there bedded. So I immediately went in, looked around, found a couple good rubs, nothing super impressive for rubs and scrapes. There was a couple scrapes and a couple rubs, but there was like 5 big beds out on this point where he'd been moving around, either based on the wind or for a vantage point. So I thought, this is the time. So I ran, hurried up, scooted over, pulled down one of my Lone Wolf tree stands, moved it over to this particular area, and checked the wind for the evening hunt, hung the stand, sat from, I guess it was about 10:30, 11 in the morning, something like that. And he actually came back in to check that bedding area later that afternoon. So he was gone all day, and about, I guess it was like 10 minutes before dark that evening, he actually came in through the corn right where I had been, downwind of his bedding area, and I shot him at like 33 yards. So that's basically
the old bump and dump.
You've told me about that moment when he stepped out of the corn, and it was like pretty cool. Tell us about what that looked like and what that felt like.
Oh geez. So I'm sitting there, and the wind is blowing. I had a northwest wind. It was probably 10 miles an hour. So. And it was that, how you guys have been there, that last like half hour before dark when the wind's still there, but it's starting to die down. About every 3 to 5 minutes, it would die down a little bit, and I could hear some rustling in the standing corn behind me, but I didn't want to move a ton, and I kept kind of looking over my shoulder, and I didn't see anything. And then, 5 minutes before dark, I hear a corn stalk break, and it's 30 yards north of me, and it was him coming out of the corn and into this little clearing. And it was the most unbelievable. It was like shock, fear, excitement, and disbelief all in one. Because I'm like, oh my, there he is. No way. You know what I mean? Because I gotten a pretty good look at him. And from the side, he's got like 11.5-inch G2s and 3s. So he's got long tines. But when he stepped out, it's that immediate, bushel basket on top of his head. And you're just, there's no question. I'm like, that's a big, big deer. And, but the coolest thing is he stepped out, and there's, a row of, it's like a fence row of trees. And there's this little tiny gap, maybe like a truck could drive through. But he came all the way to the gap, stuck just his head in, not his full body. And he scanned with his eye. This is the coolest part. He scanned for probably 2 to 3 solid minutes, which felt like 10, but it was probably 2 minutes. He had come downwind over his bedding area. Luckily, I'd taken pretty good precaution with scent control that day, but he didn't win me, and he came in, and he stood there for, like I said, 2 to 3 minutes and really just scanned the whole little point and ridge, and visually to make sure that there wasn't anything threatening there before he went in there. And then he looped way out around and, to come back in. And I think what he was really going to do, he wasn't going to embed there right then. Obviously, because it was late in the evening. I think he was just coming back in kind of to check to say, all right,
whatever spooked me out of here, is it a threat? And can I come back in here tomorrow morning if the wind's right and bed down here? That's what I honestly think he was doing. And, of course, he was unaware that 20 feet in the air, I was sitting right there. So, and as he kind of headed up to that spot where he was bedded, he passed by it right about 30 yards. And I went on autopilot and made the shot, but it wasn't, it was a decent shot, but yeah, that's what happened. So.
And then you moved back to Michigan.
Exactly, you're right. No, I was already in Michigan. That was
okay. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So Corey, you've hunted there since that year.
Yes.
So now that buck's dead, have you ever scouted that area or hunted that area again where a new buck moved into that bedding area, or how has that worked? Or have you noticed other mature bucks using that same bedding area now that he's gone, or?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I do believe, like I said, I get to hunt about every other year. So on the off years, I can't speak for that. But the other guy that does hunt there has a trail camera that's within 150 yards or so there. And the following year, he was getting pictures of another. I think he was probably a 4-year-old, 140, mid 140 type class 10 pointer that had moved into that area. Because the year that I killed that big deer, I had sat really close to it was a couple hundred yards, but fairly close where I could see up into that draw a little bit. And I had seen basically just a couple small bucks kind of skirting the outside edge. But I think the year that he was in there, he was the buck. I really don't think there were too many other deer using that area. But of course, now that he's gone, I think there's been several other bucks that are kind of using that point. And I think it's more of a, it's an advantageous view, more of a vantage point. I mean, obviously they use the wind, but you could see really if you go get in that buck's bed and kind of kneel down. I know like Dan Infalt does this type of stuff a lot, where you can see from the deer's actual line of sight. You can see quite a ways down into this draw, and there's a creek bottom. I mean, you probably can see 150 yards, which was huge because anything coming up from the bottom when it gets to the 150 yards, he can see it. And he's out of there, and he can lay with the wind at his back, and he's kind of golden. So it was a great spot, and I'm certain that there's other bucks using it now. But
one of my questions about that scenario, when you bump a deer out of his bed, you want to set up near that bed. But I think the biggest, the crux of that tactic then is putting your tree stand in the right place so that you don't get winded, but you're within range of getting a shot. How did you pick that tree? What were you thinking through all these things, or what was going through your mind there?
Yeah, well, I mean, there was two factors. I looked at the one that was probably the best for the shot was just a bad tree. There was a tree that was 20 yards from the little point where he had 3 or 4 really good beds out on this point where I could see, and there's a couple of trees, how the buck will lay there, and there's a big rub right where he's bedded. Where he maybe stands up and stretches and rubs. There's a couple of those right there. And there was a tree that would have been prime because any spot off that point he came in, I would have shot 20 yards, 25 max. But the tree itself was like a bur oak, and it was on a weird lean, and it was just going to be a pain. And I thought, I just don't want to be in that tree. But then I started thinking, okay, where am I going to have more than one shot? Because at that point, I could shoot him as soon as he got onto that point, but what if he never made it? That was my thought. I thought, well, if he never gets to all the way out to this point, then I never have a shot. You know what I mean? So I started thinking about that, and then I moved it closer to the edge of this edge of the cornfield because there's there's a little cut where it drops down, and there's almost like where a farmer's path where a tractor would drive through right there, and there's about a 15-yard wide strip where any deer that comes from the north or south kind of has to pass by this stand. And then if he wants to get up on that little point, that's where I had the 30-yard shot. So it actually gave me 3 shots from the tree that I picked. Neither one of those trees were really good for the wind because of the fact that what he did, he did a 360-degree circle downwind. So I think lucked out because I was high enough up on this hilltop kind of, and my scent control, I think I just lucked out that he didn't win me, to be honest with you, because I think almost all those big bucks will do a pretty big
J hook or 360 loop around their bedding area. And I mean, you're never going to be 100% set free. I think I just, the angle that he came in and the height that I was in the tree just worked out for me. So,
yeah, I got to say,
yeah,
I don't know anybody who hangs their stands as high as you do, Corey.
Yeah, I've been known to hang them up there a little ways.
And I think Ross, you can attest to that, can't you?
Yeah, actually, the buck I shot my deer out of this year, Corey hung that stand for me.
It's true.
I probably wouldn't have shot that buck if Corey didn't hang that stand, because there's no way I would have got this thing in that tree.
It's like 35 feet up there. It's crazy.
Your face was priceless this year, Mark, when you came to the one I shot in Michigan. You looked up at that stand, and Mark was like, "Ooh, it was, it's up there a ways."
Literally.
I remember when
30 feet at least.
Corey was up there. Man, he was just. I thought he was going to die the whole time. Like, I had my phone in my hand, ready to speed dial 911.
Well, in Corey's just a wild man when it comes to hanging trees. He's just a tree monkey up there, and he does things that I don't know anybody else who would do them, but you get away with it. So I guess with that said, Ross, tell us about your hunt in the tree that Corey hung your stand in years and years ago.
So yeah, he hung that years and years ago. I remember at the time I was looking for some new places to hunt, and it's not really like a special. I was looking for some out of the way properties, maybe that people didn't, have permission or didn't hunt or overlooked. Because most of the, like everybody all knows, most of the really good stuff is already spoken for. So I was looking on maps and looking for places that looked like good. They had good potential, and then just from driving around, I got a good idea where all the deer were at, where they felt safe, and then you glass in the summers and even in the fall, and you can spot some pretty nice bucks. And so after doing that, found a really good area, and then you look at the neighboring properties, and then you can see they're kind of like these open pasture kind of cattle farms, not really a lot of cover, spotty woods, mostly open, but they border the really good stuff. So I decided, and I looked at one, and I'm like, that one looks pretty promising. So I stopped by the farmer and got to talking to him, and shed hunted it at first. As I did that, I was kind of scoping it out, found a nice shed, found some amazing sign, and then I knew, oh man, I got to ask permission to hunt this place. So I luckily asked at the right time, because somebody that was hunting it was no longer hunting it, and fortunately I got permission, which I'm really thankful for. And then so it's just kind of like it's 80 acres, it's narrow, say like 240 stacked on each other. The first 60 acres is pretty much, it'll be like corner beans. And then in the back 20, there's some cattle pasture. It's all open. There's a nice creek bottom, but it's kind of got those like rocky cliffs and stuff like that. So on those ridges then out of the neighboring property, there's some nice trails, and some of the deer kind of funnel through into some of that pasture ground and then even to the crop fields there. So it was a really nice tree that I found. And I looked at that thing for so long, and I took pictures of it. I think I even sent Corey pictures. I don't even remember. But I'm like, can you get a tree stand in that tree? And thankfully he did, because it's been a good tree to me. And when he was hanging that thing, I remember him sitting on, like, he was sawing a limb that he was sitting on. Like, it was just the scariest thing I've ever seen, but it has been an awesome tree. And so that's the spot I've hunted quite a bit for the last few years, but I don't hunt a lot anymore. This year I've been hunting a different farm. There are a couple of really nice bucks that I was hoping to get a crack at. I had one good opportunity at one early on, but just wasn't really the greatest, and I kind of let him walk, and I was kicking myself later on after that, because during the rut I was seeing tons of 2-year-olds, and I just was not seeing the mature deer. So it got to be towards, like November 10th, 11th, that kind of 9, 10, 11. Things were still slow over there, and I actually decided to bail. And so since we were getting close to like lockdown, I kind of thought to myself, if my best
my best opportunity to shoot a mature buck is going to be at this place I was talking about. And the reason for that is because later in November, closer to lockdown and during lockdown, a lot of the big bucks that are on the neighboring properties, they start pushing those does into those like isolated, secluded little pockets of woods and into the pasture ground away from all the other deer. So I thought, well, I'm just going to give it a shot and see what happens. So got in there real early, set up, and it was an awesome morning. It was one of those frosty mornings, beautiful morning, not a lot of wind. And, you know, you could hear some of the footsteps initially as it started to get light out. Some does and fawns started trickling in. And they kind of hung out around my stand there, kind of heading back into all the cover across the fence onto the neighbors. And so as I was sitting there, I was watching this doe out in front of me. She was just standing there for the longest time. She just wouldn't leave. I was actually kind of getting annoyed by her. And she just sat there and sat there and sat there. And then I was just kind of staring at her, and I heard some crunching to my left. And then that's when I saw just a glimpse of a rack. And like right when I saw that rack, I was like, okay, it's going to happen. And I knew it was a shooter right away. And I could see him through some cedars. He went over to a tree, started raking the tree with his antlers and putting on a show. And I got ready, and that doe was still in front of me. I couldn't stand up. I was kind of stuck where I was at, but I was in a good position where he was off to my left. I could still make good shot. And the doe then that buck was with, she kind of, instead of coming down the trail right in front of me at 15 yards is what they were going to do, actually probably like 10 yards, would have been a piece of cake shot. She actually popped out and headed towards the pasture behind me, kind of angling. And then I was like, oh no, because to my left around the tree, it gets kind of tough shooting. There's not as much room. There's not as many opportunities. So I got really nervous. And so I was kind of slowly starting to squeak around my stand to try to get into position, and that big buck turned, and he started to walk and follow her. So I'm watching that doe to kind of get an idea of where that buck is, or the path that buck's going to take, so I can be prepared for when I need to stop him, or I'm going to get a shot. And of course, she takes this angle that doesn't give me any shot opportunity. So I'm like, oh crap. So at that point, I'm watching this buck. He turns and looks at me, and he's kind of where he's at on the hill is kind of eye level, and he's just like looking right through me. It's one of those like freaky moments where you think they can see, but they can't, but they're just like looking right through you. And it was crazy for a while. I thought I was just going to get busted, but he didn't bust me. He turned, and then he just started to follow her. But fortunately, he didn't follow straight behind her. He kind of angled towards me a little bit. And then, so he was on the perfect path to give me a shot in an opening. He got behind a little bush. I drew. And then as he broke that bush, I'm drawn, and I can feel my cam resting right against my bow hook. And I was like, oh, crap. Then there's like a little bit of a panic moment where I'm just trying to kind of shimmy and squat a little bit and kind of hunch down and get it in a position where the cam won't hit the hook. And as I did that, I finally found a spot, and he was slightly quartering to me, and I let the arrow fly. Unfortunately, I hit him a little back, and it kind of angled back a little bit, so it was not an ideal shot. He took off, and I saw him stop up on the hill. I could see his rack, and then he slowly kind of left. And so after a lot of thought process and asking all my buddies and Mark and Corey and everybody, I decided I'd leave him overnight. And I shot him in the morning, and I thought, well, shoot, I could go look for him tonight, or I could just look for him the next morning. So I decided to give him 24 hours. And then my buddy Peter, my dad, and my wife, and then my son, we all went tracking the buck the next morning, which will be a great memory. We got on his trail and ended up finding him dead in some cover. So it was a pretty awesome hunt, but I think I'm really glad I made the decision to kind of just bail on the one property and go for broke, kind of where I knew it gets hot around that time of season. And I shot him on November 12th. I didn't know if I mentioned that or not. That's the day I shot that buck.
So you went off historic data, basically information you've collected over the years saying, hey, I know that I mean, is this information based off trail camera pictures or just from the stand intel?
No, just from the stand. That this spot, you go walk by there. There's not too much to like figure out. There's not too much thinking that needs to go into it. It was more off of observation and just kind of knowing the property from over the years, and
Right.
just knowing that it gets good later on. Early in the season you can see a nice buck, but they don't come into that farm until those does start coming into heat, and those bucks start bringing them over there. Those does kind of start getting away from the crowd, or even when those does get hurt. There's so many deer on the neighboring properties, and I mean there's so many little bucks, and they just harass the crap out of those does, and those does even kind of will come over into that crappier pasture ground to get away from the crowd because they're just sick of being harassed, I think. And then those bucks know that too, and then they'll start, like later on, they just start running those little circuits in there. So that's kind of why it gets a little good later on.
What about the position of that tree stand? Because I think, like you said, this property is kind of featureless to some degree. There's not a whole lot of cover on all the covers on your neighbors, but I think because of where that tree specifically is, you're able to catch that movement. Can you elaborate a little bit more on specifically, right where that tree stand is and why that does seem to funnel a lot of the deer traffic past it?
So it's just like if you're going through those front fields that I was talking about, you get to the end of the field as a fence, and then there's pasture. And it kind of makes a big downward sloping hill, and then it meets some trees on the ridge there. So it's kind of like down the, halfway down that hill there. And then there's this ridge that meets the property, and it's got some cover to it. It's rocky. It's got these rock outcroppings, and there's a creek in the bottom. The same thing on the other side, and then it connects to the lease where there's just thick cover. So those ridges, it hits that fence, and then all of a sudden it's just this thick, nasty stuff. It's like the most beautiful whitetail ground you could ever imagine. It's just gorgeous. Best bedding areas you can ever imagine. And so those deer, they always, it's really hard to get them across that fence. And so they kind of run that fence, and they'll run that ridge, especially like, if you have a north wind, and this ridge runs east-west. If you have a north wind, they'll run that ridge, and occasionally they'll hop that fence and run that ridge on the leeward side. And so they feel safe that way. But then all the stuff, that it connects to, it all kind of funnels down into that area. So down into that creek bottom and into that ridge. So it kind of makes like a nice funnel, and then it's right tight to a lot of the good cover where they come from.
Yeah, I got to hunt with you in that stand once or twice a few years back after I shot a buck in Iowa down there, and then I filmed you for a few days. And to that point, those two hunts were the most mature big bucks I'd ever seen in a single day. I think the first day I saw 4, and the next day we saw like 5 or something.
Yeah,
that was crazy.
That was, and it has never been the same ever again.
It hasn't been that good since.
No, it's every year it gets a little slower, and that's what happens a lot of times with like all of our properties. They don't last forever, and sometimes we lose permission, or they aren't as good as they used to be. And this one's kind of that way. It's still good. It still killed a really nice buck, but with the hunting pressure on the neighbors, they just pound it, and it just gets really slow. There's more cows now. There's more pressure everywhere. It's kind of slowing down a little bit. It still can kill a really nice buck, but man, I wish I could go back a few years. That was amazing.
Yeah, that was pretty crazy. Well, this one was nothing to scoff at. It was, your second biggest buck? Is that right?
Yeah, nice. He's a beautiful. Yeah, I'm assuming it was 4. I don't know, mid-150s, 10. So he's a great deer, big deer. And I actually saw him the week prior to the 12th. I saw him. I got in that tree stand. And I sat down, and no more than 15 minutes later, I saw him cruise that creek bottom. Called to him a little bit, but he just went on his merry way. And I did have a camera in there, Dan, a little bit, and I did get him on camera a couple times, and he seemed like he was he seemed like he was the man right in that little section there, and he was checking. There's a couple doe groups that kind of use that regularly, and he seemed like he was really running that quite a bit. Actually, I think I saw him early in October also. It's hard to say, but I'm pretty sure I saw him early October. So he must have been betting on the neighbors there, and then he just kind of was checking those does that ended up getting kind of pushed out in those pastures a little bit.
During the rut, how much do you rely on trail cameras as far as intel is concerned? I know it sounds like you just kind of made a random move this year, but on other years, are you using trail camera pictures to, make this tree stand decisions?
During the season, not so much. I do. I put them on I usually run cameras on scrapes and get inventory. But a lot of times I'll put my cameras in areas where I think I maybe am considering hunting or want to get info for maybe like the next year. And I let them sit there all year, and I leave them go. And then I pick them up after the season. That's usually what I do. I don't, and then, the following year I can see, okay, this is what's going on there and what kind of deer were in the area. And then I use that for the next year. But usually I'm not really good at letting stuff sit that much. Or if I had cameras I was constantly checking, I think I'd do more harm than good, because I'm not that good at leaving them alone on some of the properties I'm hunting. But usually it's just for inventory, Dan. I try a little bit here and there, but usually it's just to kind of see what's around, and I run them on those scrapes.
Right.
Now speaking of that, Ross, I know, or correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you've kind of seen, just based on our conversations in the past, that on another one of your properties, there seems to be a pretty consistent uptick in activity in like late November. Is that something that you or Kendall, your wife, are planning on trying to key in on that property as we get later into this month? Am I right on that? And then B, is that something you're going to do?
Yeah, Kendall's going to, as long as, we can make it happen, she's going to try and capitalize on that. Like that Thanksgiving time and even towards like that really early December time is just, it can be awesome. And a lot of times on one of the farms that I have permission on, there's the biggest bucks show up right around Thanksgiving, and they stick around for a week or two there, and it's pretty cool to see. And I was really trying to hold out for something big this year, and if I wasn't going to shoot something early, I was going to really hammer it around that time frame. But a lot of the neighboring properties, and kind of like I said, right before shotgun season, they just kind of pile in there and they check those last does, and those big bucks just start moving. And that, living in Wisconsin stuff, I never experienced any of that because in like Michigan, the gun season's so early. But in Iowa, you get to see some of that because the gun season's in December. Whereas I never experienced any of that before. I would have never thought you could have such amazing hunting, towards the end of November, beginning of December like that.
Yeah. That's one of those things that me and Corey have always talked about, trying to key in on down in Ohio. In the past, when we haven't filled our tags early, we've always talked about trying to get back there around Thanksgiving, because they have a similar situation. Their gun season doesn't open till later, and you get that activity that you just wouldn't have here in Michigan. And 3 years ago, I did go down there at that time frame, and I saw two of the bucks I was after in the middle of the day. So that always was something that's kind of stuck with me. And I always thought to myself, if I didn't have that tag filled, that would be the time to go give it another crack. And Don Higgins. We had Don Higgins on the podcast a few weeks ago, and he's a huge proponent of that late November time period. So if you're still out there trying to fill your tag, there's still opportunity.
Oh yeah, I know. I was actually really looking forward to that time. I wasn't looking forward to holding on to my tag that long, but I would have been pretty optimistic. I could at least have maybe a good encounter or two of some really mature deer, which even that property you were hunting in Iowa last year, that great big buck you had an encounter or two with. Like, I ended up getting him on camera. What was that, like December 1st or something, daylight.
Yeah, and you egged me on.
Going on, yes. It's a great time.
Yeah. I unfortunately
okay. Quick question, Ross. if you could I gave you 2 choices to hunt, first week in November or last week in November. What would you pick?
Ooh. Well, you know what? On the properties I can hunt, I would say last week in November. I don't know if I say that for every property, but where I can hunt, I would say last week in November. If I wanted to shoot a mature deer, that's when I would hunt.
Corey, same question.
Oh, I guess I'm going to have to go the opposite and probably say the first week. Not because I don't think Ross is 100% correct. I just think that for me, a lot of times, if I want to kill a truly mature deer, I'm going to be hunting out of state. And, for seeing them, for me anyways, the best deer movement usually is that, November 3rd to the 8th has always been historically the best for me. But again, it's a different situation. Like if you live there and you have a couple farms that have, you've had that experience with, I think that late November's, awesome. But for me, I'm going first week.
Mark.
That's what I'm going to say. Yep.
I think I would probably still say first week. Not, again, like Corey said, not because I don't believe that the last week can be really good, but simply because the majority of my own personal experience of good activity has always been earlier in November. And just because I would be looking at what other people have told me for the late November being really great versus what I've seen personally being early November being really great, I would probably just feel a little tiny bit more confident going with the first week. Gotcha. What about you, Dan?
I would, I don't know. I to be honest with you, I really have never put a lot of time in the tree stand late or the last week of November because I used all my vacation before that. But I would probably lean towards the last week of November.
Just based on, so you're basing that just on other people's testimonials, basically.
No,
right?
I'm basing it off what my trail cameras have told me throughout the years.
Okay.
To me, it seems like that the 1st through the 5th is, or even into the 7th is good. But if I want like a giant, I'll be waiting longer.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think there's something about the everybody always says that, hey, you got to get on these deer before these does go into heat. I think we may be overstepping or forgetting about the opposite, where bucks are cruising after all the does have been bred and still looking for that last potential hot doe. I think for me, that's what I would base it off of.
Yeah.
And what my trail cameras have said.
Yeah. My comment on that too is okay, go ahead, Russ.
I think there's probably like so many different right answers just depending on where you're at. Just from my experience where I'm hunting, what I'm hunting now, I know like the best time over the years that I've learned to kill a mature buck where I'm at would be that last week of October. And then it gets slow right around Halloween, first little bit of November. There's always the first couple of early does. Seems like the big bucks are on them. Gets slowed down, picks up a little bit kind of when you guys were talking. And then it gets really slow during lockdown again. And then that Thanksgiving weekend gets crazy again. Or around, that later after lockdown, Thanksgiving, that kind of thing. That's just my experience, and that's just where I'm at. But I know there's different scenarios for different places, but that's kind of what I've noticed.
Did you have something to say, Corey?
Yeah, I was just going to say what I've always heard from, a lot of guys that have, been successful on big deer is, those mature bucks, I'm going to say, your 4.5-year-olds and older. I mean, 3.5 is a mature deer, but a truly mature 4-year-old and older. I think a lot of those bucks, I've always heard guys say, they want to breed the first doe that comes in, which is often, like Ross said, the 28th, 9th, 30th, 31st of October, that last day or two of October. And then they want to get that first doe because they've been through the rut several years in a row. They know what's going on. And then they also want to breed the last does that come in because they want to kind of hold on to the whole experience the longest is my kind of way of looking at it is what I think. I know maybe that's not the right way to put it, but that's kind of what I'm, you know what I mean? So I think kind of the middle part of the rut,
you've got a majority of the does coming in, but you also have all the 2-year-olds, year-and-a-half-olds running everywhere. So your best percentage of seeing the most bucks is probably that, 3rd through the 10th. But I think like you guys both just alluded to, if you want to kill a true giant, 5.5, 6.5-year-old buck that's a home body, you're probably better off killing him, like Ross said, that last week in October or that last week in November. Truthfully, you're probably right.
One piece of devil's advocacy here, though,
okay.
to think about.
Okay.
And I agree. I agree with everything you guys are saying. One potential downside of that, or one reason why in some areas that time frame could be more difficult, though, is the hunting pressure factor. You wait 3.5 more weeks, even if there isn't a gun season, even if it's just bow hunters. If you've got 3 more weeks of guys hunting hard, and let's be honest, that first 2 weeks in November is when the majority of guys are really putting in their serious tree stand hours. Guys are traveling out of state for their rutcations, or they're taking their vacation time and hunting all day. So that's probably, other than gun season, that is the highest concentration of hunting pressure. So if you wait till after all of that, you're going to have your biggest impacts on those deer too. So I wonder if in the areas of low hunting pressure, you do see that really great late movement, but maybe in the areas with high hunting pressure, it's less so, simply because of that hunting pressure impact.
Yeah, most definitely. I know if I wasn't in Iowa and I didn't have the opportunities I have, I wouldn't be saying that. If I was in Michigan and say like hunting public land, I would never say that. I would probably say I'd spend most of my time in October trying to kill a mature buck in a bedding area or something like that instead.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely area specific,
Yeah.
Because in Iowa, I wouldn't probably say that. In Michigan, heck no, I wouldn't say that. Or if you have a big managed property, of course it's going to be a totally different scenario. But really, I mean, if you do your homework and you find bedding areas and you do really good scouting, then October is just as good of a time as any to kill a mature buck.
Yeah, very true. So, all right, so we've got to wrap things up here, but I want to ask one final question for all of us here. So all 4 of us have killed a buck during the rut this year, so we were successful. But at the same time, I'm sure each one of us either made a mistake and learned from it, or just learned some type of lesson for some other reason. So I kind of want to know, for each one of us, what was your biggest lesson learned from this year's rut? And Dan, since you're a pro with this kind of stuff, I want to start with you.
What, because I make the most mistakes?
No, I mean you're pro at these tough questions that I send out at you. So what is your number one lesson learned from the 2016 rut?
This is going to sound kind of cocky, right? But I don't feel I had the opportunity to make a lot of mistakes this year. I had one of those seasons where I went in, I did what I tried to do, and I was successful. It happened right away. And, we talked about this the last podcast about being lucky, but at the same time, everything that I did was kind of calculated. It just so happened that a buck was there when I started my vacation, and I tagged out early. But if I'm really going to try to force myself into a learning situation here, I would say that it would be every hunt that I did this year I took place in was a first time in scenario where it was the only stand I hunted 2 times this entire year was the stand that I shot my buck out of. Everything else was in and out. If I didn't see anything, I wasn't going back to it, or I was setting up for a doe and I tore it straight down and left and didn't go back. I didn't put unnecessary pressure on certain stand locations.
Interesting. All right. What about you, Corey?
For me, I'm going to say patience is probably what I learned. I shouldn't say I learned patience, but I mean, being patient on the property was probably one of the number one reasons that I was able to be successful. In the past, maybe not so much in Iowa, but in Michigan, I typically, I go out of state every year, the first week or two in November. So I always, I only give myself, I only have about 3 or 4 weeks to get it done here. So I've found in the past that, if I get a trail camera picture on October 10th or 12th, and I think to myself, wow, I only have 15, 18 days or something before I leave, I got to get in there and shoot that deer. I got to try right away. And maybe I don't wait for the right wind, or maybe I go on a low percentage day, it's too warm or something else. And I didn't do that this year. And I kind of worked more of that outside in approach. I hunted other stands, and I waited to that, like I said, that best stand that's kind of back in their ways to the right day. And it was my first sit, first time in. And historically for me, I don't know what you guys think, but my first 2 sits on any of my stands are obviously the best. And I think almost all, but maybe one of the good bucks I've ever killed have been in the first 2 sits. So, yeah, I think patience, just not getting overly aggressive too soon, in October, is what really helped me.
What about you, Russ?
I think it's getting tougher, less time, than I used to have. So I think I just have to work on being a little bit more prepared, or not shed hunting them so much, probably scouting a little bit more, that kind of thing. So I think I spend my time doing stuff that's maybe not as productive. So this year I got into season, I was prepared, but then I wasn't, things change every year, and I wasn't prepared for them or ready for them. Didn't have as much time. So I feel like I kind of got a little behind, which hurt me a little bit. So I think just using my time a little bit more wisely, like in spring, to
I got a question
for next year.
Did you have a kid this year?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
that's
me as well. Both
why.
of us did.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw Corey. I knew you had one, but I didn't know that you had one, Ross. So
yeah, obviously that changes things.
Yeah. So first off, congratulations to both of you, and second off, good luck hunting as hard as you have in the past.
Yeah, exactly. That's what little bit, just being a little bit smarter, not harder, kind of thing.
Right.
That's kind of what I got to focus on.
So my biggest lesson learned this rut, based on what you guys have just been telling me, is to not have a kid. And
that is, if my wife wasn't so close to me, I'd probably say yes, but instead I have to say stuff like, you know what, Mark, just keep an open mind and blah, 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 blah.
I'm just kidding. I'm looking forward to having one of those little rascals. In all seriousness, my biggest lesson learned probably would be taking what you and Corey said, but the opposite. So I think my mistake I made this year, and I don't know, the mistake I made is that I hunted too hard for Holyfield too much. So what happened was that by the time the rut rolled around, I wasn't getting as much doe activity up in the couple spots I can hunt him. Instead, most of the does were staying back in the cover or on this wide open field, and so that's where Holyfield was. I think if I had not hunted so hard in October for him there, I think I would have had a better chance of catching him in late October or early November in there if that was my first or second time in there instead of my 5th or 6th time in there. So the issue, though, is that I chose to do that, to push it early, because I was getting daylight sightings of him. So I don't know. It's like this weird catch-22. Usually when you have daylight activity, you want to move in on it, but that daylight activity did not translate into a close enough daylight encounter. So this is the thing I've been battling with: is was a mistake going in there, and if not, or I don't know. It obviously was a mistake because I didn't kill him. So now I just need to try to figure out how to make the best of this second half of the season. But that's probably my yet to be completely figured out lesson.
All right. I know that was supposed to be the last question, but I have another last question, if that's okay, Mark.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So, Ross and Corey, have you guys ever shed hunted together?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, gonna remove myself from this, and I'm gonna ask Corey. I'm gonna ask you first. Who is a better shed hunter, Mark or Ross?
This is just a straight up question. Who's a better shed hunter?
Yeah, who's a better shed hunter?
I'm gonna have to go with Ross, and I don't think it's because Mark. I don't think it's because Mark couldn't be equally as good. It's just because Ross has had significantly more experience and more time doing it, and especially in Iowa. So yeah, I'm gonna have to. Mark, you're good. I'm not saying you're bad, but Ross is actually better than I am, and
He walks
probably
too
more.
fast.
Mark, what's that?
Now, all I heard was Ross is better than Mark. Now Ross, you've hunted with both Mark and Corey. Who's a better shed hunter, Mark or Corey?
Oh, Corey. Definitely.
Okay. Now, Mark, who's a better shed hunter, Ross or Corey?
All right, this is the ultimate question here.
Now,
I'm gonna say,
never mind. Go for it.
I'm gonna say Ross because he plays by the rules. Corey's the shed poacher.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, he's a shed poacher. He's disqualified.
They don't teach you how to walk straight lines in Michigan, do they?
Dan, when you walk with those guys, I know you've shed hunted with Mark, right? You've shed with both of them.
Yep.
Are they like 100 yards ahead of you on their line, like blowing your doors off, walking like practically running?
Well,
'Cause that's what they did to me.
I think this is. I don't know. I don't want to, say it, but this is all speculation. We were 1 second. We were walking down a ridge, and I swear to God, I thought I saw Corey go, "Hey, look, is that a shed?" And Mark turned his head, and then Corey jumped in front of Mark's line, and then walked like 40 yards and saw it. He saw the shed like 20 yards before Mark saw it, and then just jumped in front of him.
You got to be careful when you shed hunt with Corey because he in all honesty, I don't know. I kid about Corey being a shed poacher. He's fine, but he does have a knack for just finding them somehow. Like, not only did he get that one right in front of me, but the absolute worst. And maybe I've told this story before, but the absolute worst ever. Me and Corey were walking this new property that we've always wanted to walk. Like, we always talk about, we got to walk this spot, but we never did. And it's just all this big CRP field that's in this area where there's lots of big deer. This was in Iowa, and we were right around this area where Ross hunts and everything. And so me and Corey go walking through there, and we walk it, and we didn't see anything. So we were coming back out to the truck, and just before we get to the truck, and me and Corey, like, at this point, we're done shed hunting. We're just walking back because we'd already walked all the good stuff. Me and Corey are like right next to each other. Like, our shoulders are almost touching. We're just BSing, talking as we walk back. And as we're walking, I hear a clunk next to me, and Corey had kicked something. And he's like, huh? And he bends down, and he picks up like a 65-inch shed. He's like, oh, look what I stepped on. And I was so pissed.
That's Corey, though. He attracts that stuff.
He does.
I have a feeling we're like right now. Corey is boiling mad, and he wants to beat our ass.
Oh, no, I'm doing all right over here. I'm just having fun. This is fun.
As he's looking at his booners on his wall, and he's looking at all the sheds he's found.
Corey definitely has.
Geez.
Corey's a very good shed hunter, and we all occasionally have to get lucky. But
This is true.
yeah, very true. All right, I'm glad we got that in there, Dan.
We got to have a part two of this conversation of
like
all
that.
four of us.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, this was fun. This was fun. This was good.
What we really need to do, we've been trying to get you to come down and meet us, Dan, during our shed hunting trip down that area this coming spring, or some point we all have to get together. Or next year, me and Corey will probably be hunting Iowa at the same time you guys will be, so maybe get together during deer camp too.
Amen.
That would be fun.
You have a trailer now too, so
True. We're gonna be camping.
Right.
We gotta convince Corey that it's okay to sit by the campfire, though. I'm the one who doesn't want to sit by the campfire. Let's be honest. But
Right.
Yeah.
these
Mark
Ross,
just gets up and moves with us. the wind changes, right?
Yeah, I don't want to get
Yeah,
smoked. I
weird.
don't want to get all smoky.
I know. I
last,
don't either.
last year when
I'm
we were
with you on
hunting,
that.
last year we were hunting and we were sitting around the fire, and here Mark is like talking. Mark's standing like 70 yards away, probably.
Oh, please.
Standing there and talking
Hollering.
upwind of the smoke. He's so terrified of that smoke. He's like 70 yards away.
Always got to be thinking about scent control protocol, guys. Always.
So,
As the combine is emitting like toxic fumes out of its rear end.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Well, I think we do need to wrap this one up, but it's been a lot of fun. So thank you, Corey, and thank you, Ross.
Thank you.
it was fun.
All right, and with that, we will wrap this episode up. I hope you enjoyed this one as much as we did. Now, before we go, though, we need to thank our partners who help make this podcast possible. So, big thank you to Sitka Gear, Redneck Blinds, Huntera Maps, Yeti Coolers, Ozonics, Carbon Express, Maven Optics, and the Whitetail Institute of North America. And finally, thank you all for joining us today. I hope your hunting season has been going well so far, but if not, keep at it, keep grinding. Good luck, and stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.